Hello friends, I am glad to see you again. Today I will tell you about the neighbor and my mountain cabin. I never expected owning a peaceful mountain cabin to cause so much conflict and tension. It was meant to be my getaway, a small place to escape city life when it got overwhelming. For years I worked extra shifts and freelanced to save for that down payment. I was proud when the deal closed on the cabin, a personal milestone. I carefully selected a spot with a clear view of the valley below and the rising sun when I bought it. I felt peace for the first time on the modest front porch, breathing in the crisp air and watching wisps of clouds roll over the mountain peaks. I quickly recharged mentally at my cabin. However, I never thought my neighbor Marlin would try to claim he had a right to live in my private property for a few days a month because he needed to breathe pure mountain air weekly. The situation went from confusing to shocking quickly, culminating in a bizarre showdown where my camera system was my best friend. This wild story shows how I protected my property, privacy, and peace of mind, while teaching an obnoxious neighbor that boundaries exist for a reason. When I first moved into the cabin, I thought I was alone on this ridge. Few buildings were nearby, just a few cabins spread across many acres of forest. A winding trail led to one of the closest cabins in 10 minutes. I didn't know who lived there until I saw a porch light one night while walking around the yard. In my first few weeks living part-time in this cabin, I barely saw anyone. It was my ideal solitude. The nights were quiet enough to hear nocturnal animals scurrying around, and the mornings were so bright that I felt more refreshed than in the city. Curiosity led me to meet Marlin randomly. I went to the local supply store one afternoon to get some hardware for minor repairs. I decided to spend a weekend cleaning my front porch railing, which was splintering. While browsing the lumber section, I felt someone staring at me. I turned around and saw a mid-50s man in a worn baseball cap and thick flannel shirt. He appeared disheveled after a long hike. I said yes to Marlin, the new occupant of that cozy little A-frame cabin near the ridge, when he introduced himself. He smiled slightly, but the atmosphere was odd. I was uneasy about his eyes darting around, but I politely ignored it, and we talked about how to maintain a porch railing in the harsh mountain winters. Since he seemed friendly, I accepted his invitation to his cabin for coffee later in the week. I was raised in a suburb where neighbors exchanged greetings, so it felt natural to maintain that spirit. I walked to his larger cabin a few days later. He had a wide front deck with old chairs, a rusted table, and some buckets. Though cluttered, the interior was comfortable. He had old lanterns hanging from the rafters, stacks of dusty books, and at least a dozen picture frames with portraits of strangers, showing his love of antiques. After coffee and discussing the best local trails, we parted ways. I remember thinking Marlin was eccentric, but not bad. I completed several cabin projects the following month. That started the transformation from a weekend retreat into a home office and relaxation space. I hired a local provider to install specialized equipment to get me decent internet up there. During this time, Marlin started dropping by unannounced more often than I liked. He would wander my property on Saturdays while I was on a ladder fixing gutters or replacing door hinges. He waved, called me, and spoke like old friends. I tried being polite, but he had no limits. He entered my porch without knocking. Despite being inside, I could hear him calling my name outside my window, expecting me to let him in. I heard something at my door one evening while cooking dinner in my small but functional kitchen. Marlin was there when I looked through the window. He brought a large plastic container of homemade stew, saying he had made extra and thought I might like some. I like neighborliness, but this felt like an invasion. After politely accepting the stew, I thanked him, but explained that I was busy and needed to finish some paperwork. He lingered in my doorway, waiting to be invited inside. I had to be firm to get him out. That night, I blamed his behavior on over-the-top small-town hospitality. However, his entitlement began there. A few weeks later, Marlin started saying the fresh mountain air was good for his lungs. He first mentioned it in a casual conversation during an unannounced visit. He said the clean air up here helped him breathe because he had some minor respiratory issues. I wasn't concerned. Cleaner air at higher elevations helps many with respiratory issues. He repeated it often, as if to plant a seed in my mind. Once, he abruptly said, "I really need to be up here a few days every week. It's the only thing that helps me sleep." I sympathized and said I appreciated the air. A moment of silence followed his nod. He casually said, "So maybe I'll just crash here at your place on those days. Much closer to the main road than mine." I was shocked. I choked on my coffee because he said that line like it was normal. My home isn't timeshare. Even if I wanted to let a friend or relative stay for a few days, I would always ask first. Marlon's bold statement implied he considered my new property his extension. I politely but honestly told him that I valued my privacy and wouldn't let anyone, even a friendly neighbor, come and go. He shrugged, changed the subject, and left. But I had a sinking feeling this was just the beginning. My suspicion was right. In the following weeks, Marlon became more aggressive. One time he came by while I was cleaning the yard and proudly declared he had come up with a schedule for himself. He would use my cabin every other weekend to breathe that wonderful, revitalizing air without having to trek all the way up to a higher peak. Before I could respond, he pulled out a folded piece of paper with a strange, handwritten itinerary of his desired stay dates. He even wrote that he would bring his own sleeping bag, insisting I wouldn't notice him. I was done by then. My place was off limits, so I told him no. I politely requested that he not bring up this topic again. He narrowed his eyes as if I had insulted him. After barely speaking, he jumped into his old pickup truck and sped down the winding road to the main highway. Despite my unease, I ignored it. I was struggling to balance my new cabin life with my corporate office responsibilities as my city job increased. I knew I'd spend less time at the cabin in the coming months. I feared leaving the cabin unattended would give Marlon an opening. I devised a second plan then. I had always considered installing a security system for the cabin because it was remote, and I often left it unoccupied for weeks. I delayed because installation and monitoring fees seemed high. Considering Marlon's strange requests, I decided it was worth every penny for my peace of mind. I hired a reputable security company that specialized in remote vacation homes like mine to install a good network of cameras, motion sensors, and an alarm to alert me to a break-in. I could also monitor the property via smartphone with this system, which was ideal. In charge of installation, I stayed at the cabin. I was relieved not to have that awkward conversation about what I was doing because Marlon didn't appear while the tech was there. After installation, I tested the cameras. The main ones pointed at the front and back doors and a wide-angle lens that covered the driveway and most of the front yard. Live feeds, recordings, and motion sensor trigger notifications were available while the system was armed. I sigh with relief, knowing I had protected my retreat from snoopers. I also had a side project. My friend Tori, a professional photographer, needed some scenic mountain shots for her portfolio. To capture sunrise and sunset photos without a long drive in the morning, I offered her a long weekend at the cabin. I did it for a friend, but I liked having someone who appreciated the area's natural beauty. I scheduled Tori's visit a month in advance, but Marlon's bizarre drama stole the spotlight. To clean and restock supplies, I overnighted at the cabin a few days before Tori arrived. Once there, I noticed subtle signs of trouble. My cabin's wooden gate to my outdoor workspace was wide open. I always lock that gate before leaving. Footprints in the dirt near my back door looked fresh. I immediately checked my last week's security camera footage, alarmed. The recordings showed Marlon repeatedly walking around my cabin. He kept testing windows and doors as if trying to get in. I could see him trying the back door. Good thing it was locked. I was furious as he looked around suspiciously, wiped his hand on his pants, and left casually. He even put his ear to the back door to listen for activity in one clip. I was mad. He had no right to wander my property or try to enter. I was relieved because my security measures worked. He never got in, and I had footage to prove it. The following morning, I gave up. I confronted Marlon. At 10 in the morning, I went to his cabin hoping he was awake but not out. He answered the door in pajamas and a rumpled t-shirt. I told him I had security footage of him trespassing and trying to break in and demanded to know his thoughts. At first, he denied everything. He laughed nervously, claimed I was imagining things, and then tried to talk about how I wasn't helping him with his health needs. I realized his entitlement was off the charts. He expected me to let him come and go in my space because he thought he was the victim. I showed him video evidence and he stopped talking and stared at me. He then made excuses, saying he heard an animal trapped in my cabin or was checking up on things. I told him I didn't buy anything. I told him to leave my property. He could hike a mountain range or ask the rangers for hiking passes to get fresh air. He didn't need my cabin. I made it clear that he was not allowed on my land after more words, but nothing resolved the tension. Tori sensed my stress when she arrived later that week. I described Marlon's sneaking and my confrontation with him. He didn't show up during Tori's stay, which surprised me. Tori and I had a great weekend. She took beautiful sunrise photos, we enjoyed starry nights on the porch, and Marlon got forgotten for a few days. I even wondered if the confrontation scared him enough to respect my boundaries. After Tori left, the calm vanished. My security app was checked the night she returned to the city. Motion was detected near my back door. Marlon reappeared in the dark when I clicked the live feed. Despite wearing a hoodie to hide, the camera's night vision caught his face. Since the back door was locked, he circled around to the front porch. I was frightened and furious. I addressed him using the security system's speaker by tapping a few buttons. "You are trespassing on private property," I shouted. "Leave now. Police will be notified." He flinched and ran off the porch like I had fired a warning shot. I needed to set my foot down harder. I contacted a local property dispute and trespassing attorney within 2 days. After I explained the situation and showed them the footage, they immediately supported me. They advised me to document every trespass and file a formal complaint with the county sheriff's office. They also suggested posting more signs, private property, no trespassing, etc., to prevent Marlon from claiming ignorance about the boundaries. I took their advice and drove to a nearby sign shop for several bright, reflective signs. They were posted on trees along the driveway, front entrance, and back gate of my cabin. I discussed the matter with the sheriff. The deputy was sympathetic after I told him Marlon had tried to intrude often. They suggested I file an official report so they could refer to it if it happened again. Having confidence that the law was on my side, I returned to the city for the work week, monitoring my cameras daily. I had another personal issue brewing during this stressful time. Adding to it, the following month, my younger brother Adam planned a small cabin engagement party. He and his fiancée wanted a picturesque setting for their announcement. So I offered my place, assuming my neighbor situation would be resolved by then. Adam and I had grown up camping, so celebrating something so joyful in the mountains felt right. I wouldn't let Marlon's bizarre entitlement ruin a special event. Adam didn't know all my Marlon issues, and I didn't want to burden him with them since he was busy planning his wedding. So I started planning. Clean up the cabin, maybe put string lights on the porch, and make a small barbecue area. The engagement party would be small, with family and close friends. I was coordinating with Adam about the menu and scheduling more cabin visits to finish everything while working in the city. I also kept checking the cameras to see if Marlon had received the message or was still attempting covert operations. I checked my phone one night after a long day at the city office to find a security alert. I pressed live feed, heart racing. Marlon's pickup truck was parked outside the gate on the driveway camera. He was probably fiddling with my gate lock. My phone alerted me to a front door camera motion alert after I connected to the feed. Marlon left the truck and walked up my front door with a small flashlight. He tried to unlock the door but failed. To look in, he cupped his hands around the window. My rage rose. I immediately called the county sheriff. The dispatcher calmly told me they'd send a deputy right away after seeing my name in the earlier report. Marlon paced around my porch muttering while I updated them on the line. The door was locked and the lights were out, so he tried the handle again, shook it, and went to the side. I lost him on the camera feed, but when I caught him again, he was by the back fence, apparently looking for a gap. His efforts were cut short when headlights appeared in the distance. Marlon saw them too and ran back to his truck. The deputy arrived moments later, but Marlon was gone. In a new statement, I stressed my video proof. The deputy thanked me for calling. Given my previous complaint, they said they'd watch for Marlon's car and consider this a serious trespassing attempt. I thought we were past polite neighbor disputes by then. Marlon's repeated actions were trespassing and possibly breaking and entering. I was determined not to let it define me. The next weekend, I installed more cameras on the cabin's sides to capture any approach from the woods behind my house. I added a reinforced steel door to the back entrance and upgraded the locks for extra security. I kept expecting Marlon while working, but he never did, which was both comforting and unsettling. I wondered what he planned next. I didn't realize Marlon was getting brazier. My friend Tori, the photographer, called me panicked a week before Adam's engagement party. She was in the area for a different assignment and knew about Marlon's tension. Tori learned from the owner of a small bed and breakfast in the nearby town that a local man, like Marlon, had been complaining about city folks hoarding all the good cabins and preventing locals from enjoying them. He seemed to be ranting that he had a right to use mountain property because he had lived there for so long and needed the air for his health. Tori warned me that he may be seeking sympathy or local support. That made me uneasy, but I knew our private property laws were clear. Marlon could not legally break into my cabin, regardless of his story. Engagement party weekend arrived. Adam, his fiancée, and 12 family and friends climbed the mountain. We planned a small ceremony to announce their engagement, a barbecue with hearty food, and warm conversations around a fire pit as the afternoon turned to dusk. The breathtaking views wowed everyone, and I felt so happy that my cabin was bringing joy to so many loved ones. The Marlon incident seemed distant for most of the day. The atmosphere was peaceful, my dad was telling old family stories, and my mom was overjoyed to get another daughter-in-law. After sunset, while eating homemade dessert, we heard a vehicle pull up on the gravel outside my fence. I quietly left the group to check my cameras. My phone showed Marlon's pickup parked near the front gate live. Heart sank. I saw him leave with a folder of papers. I felt angry because I thought he was going to cause a scene on Adam's special day. Not tonight, I thought. On my property. We're celebrating. I approached the gate determined to keep this disruption from the party. I directly asked him why he was there. He waved the folder in front of me with a smug look, claiming it contained legal documents. He kept ranting about how he needed access to the lower altitude cabin, my place as if it was too high, and that I had illegally obstructed a community resource. It was nonsense. I told him to leave because we were having a family event and he intruded. Adam came up behind me as we argued to see what was up. Adam is usually calm, but Marlon's hostility made him frown. Adam stopped Marlon from pushing past me toward the cabin and told him to leave. I worried our gathering would be ruined by rising voices. A patrol car pulled up with one of the deputies I had spoken to before. It may have been called in by a neighbor, guest, or deputy who was nearby. When the officer approached, Marlon waved his legal papers, but the deputy looked at him, shook his head, and told him to leave. Marlon shouted that he was being persecuted as his face burned with anger. The deputy calmly warned him again. Marlon stomped to his truck, threw the folder in the passenger seat, and ran away. Adam and I looked relieved. After returning to the party, I apologized for the brief interruption. Marlon disappeared, and the evening went smoothly. My sense of intrusion persisted. I hated that he tried to ambush us with a lie in front of my family. It confirmed that he would continue his bizarre quest to occupy my cabin. I decided then to take a bigger step. The next day, I told the sheriff what happened. I filed another report, adding to my harassment case against Marlon. The deputy advised me to get a protection order, restraining order, to keep Marlon away from me and my property. I was hesitant because these situations can escalate if someone is truly unstable, but it seemed like the best option for a long-term solution. I considered my options and collected footage and documentation for a week. I spent some weekends at the cabin, always checking the cameras first. When I arrived, I found new footprints and tampering, but no break-ins. Someone had rummaged through my trash bin and left it open. Another time, my shed padlock was tampered with. I took photos and saved footage of every event. The thought of him prowling around checking for me was unsettling. If the cabin lights were off, he might think he could come and go. Finally, I sought a restraining order. I gave my attorney all the evidence and we filed the paperwork. A judge heard our evidence at a hearing. Marlon was summoned. He arrived disheveled with that same folder of questionable legal documents. He claimed he needed my cabin for medical needs and that I was withholding fresh air from him. The judge gave him a long time to explain, then requested my videos, police reports, and trespassing attempts. Judge ruled that Marlon's actions were unjustified harassment and trespassing after the hearing. Marlon was barred from my property by a protective order. It was illegal for him to visit my gate or cabin. Doing so would result in arrest. My shoulders felt lighter, but I wondered if he would follow the order or dig in out of spite. I befriended some neighbors during the legal process. To my surprise, several of them had grievances with Marlon, though not as intense as mine. They told stories of him wandering onto their land, rummaging through their gardens, and claiming he had the right to their produce if it crossed shared property lines. Some said he claimed the local wildlife belonged to him and complained if others put out bird feeders because it disrupted his birdwatching routine. He had been a community thorn for years, but he rarely confronted people as aggressively as he did with me. With its prime location, my new cabin seemed like a special target, and he decided it fit his health plan better than his own home. Some neighbors said they told him to stay away after he repeatedly trespassed or borrowed without returning. He was notorious, but nobody knew how far he would go to get his way on someone else's property. Knowing I wasn't alone eased my mind. Others had boundary issues like him. However, they told me he rarely got physical, so they were worried he did with me. They assured me that most locals supported my right to protect my cabin, and that Marlon's efforts to rally support would likely fail. After the restraining order, calm returned. My cabin was enjoyable without constant surveillance. Marlon was absent from my daily camera feeds for a while. No more suspicious activity near the doors or footprints in my yard. Restaining the deck and clearing brush around the perimeter to reduce fire hazards were among the improvements I completed. For a few blissful weeks, I thought the problem was solved. Marlon returned like a bad penny. My camera alerted me to a driveway sensor trigger late one afternoon. I checked my phone and saw Marlon's truck again near my gate, shocking me. He didn't try to enter this time. He placed something on the ground near the fence. He got back in and drove away without looking at the camera. I drove there the next morning. A small cardboard box was taped to the ground. "Evidence of my right" was written in thick marker on top. I cautiously opened it, expecting something strange like old public records or who knows what else. I found a dozen pages of old medical forms referencing a lung condition, random photos of the area near my property lines, and a poorly scrawled note accusing me of stealing his air. I realized the guy was delusional. I photographed everything, documented the incident, and notified the sheriff. The box was to be kept in case I needed it for legal action. That event shook me, but strengthened me. He violated my restraining order by showing up. I gave police the camera footage. They warned me Marlon would be arrested if he broke the order again. That scenario soon occurred. A week later, on a cloudy afternoon, my motion sensors alerted me again. My newly installed side cameras caught Marlon playing near my back fence, probably thinking it was hidden. I immediately called the sheriff. They arrived quickly and caught him near the gate before he could escape. It was too late to argue, waving his arms and shouting that he was just out for a walk. He violated a protective order on camera on my property line. Right away, they arrested him. Marlon suffered many consequences after his arrest. After one night in jail, he was released pending a restraining order and trespassing court date. All the documented attempts to break into my land earned him harassment charges. The judge ordered him to pay a fine, attend counseling, and follow the restraining order. If he broke it again, he'd face jail time. My relief was immense. Finally, the law had intervened to tell him his behavior was unacceptable. Nothing became perfect overnight. In fear of retaliation, I kept my cameras rolling and checked in with local authorities if I saw any signs of his return. Strangely, Marlon went silent after the arrest and judge's ruling. He seemed to retreat into the shadows, likely realizing his tactics were digging him deeper into legal trouble. He was rumored to sell his cabin and move, but I never confirmed that. I knew he stopped lurking around my fence and banging on my door. That was enough for me to celebrate. Ironically, this ordeal made my property one of the most secure in the mountains. Visitors joke that my fortress has cameras from every angle, motion-activated floodlights, and heavy locks. It may seem excessive, but I see it as necessary protection after what I went through. Actually, the whole thing taught me about boundaries and standing up for my rights. I was always a peacemaker, but this situation forced me to speak up. It's unsettling to learn how far someone will go to claim something they don't own. It also bonded my family. Adam, his fiancée, and our parents saw the drama. They supported me emotionally and financially when I needed security upgrades or lawyers. I felt better knowing I wasn't alone. Since my cabin is so beautiful, Adam suggested a low-key honeymoon there when he and his fiancée get married. I gladly accepted, but we joked that I might need to sweep the area to avoid unexpected guests. They liked the idea of relaxing under the stars without an uninvited neighbor. Using her cabin experiences and Marlon's drama as inspiration, my friend Tori created a new photography series. She called it Boundaries, using photos of fences, gates, and tree lines and quotes about personal space and limits. She even included some scenic photos of my cabin in her portfolio, but she carefully omitted any references to me or the location. I'm glad this situation inspired something. The biggest benefit for me was learning how important privacy is and how important it is to protect what matters. After Marlon was convicted of violating the restraining order, I drove home from the courthouse feeling triumphant and sad. While I was disappointed that someone had to be prosecuted, I was glad the system worked. He repeatedly tried to force me to use my property as a public resource. To justify his repeated trespassing, he made up medical reasons, personal entitlements, and lies. Despite everything, the law stated that private property is private and no excuses would change that. The court's decision reduced Marlon's presence. I believe he spent more time at his cabin or traveled. According to supply store gossip, he may have checked himself into a clinic. Honestly, I wish him well. If he has respiratory issues, I hope he finds a better way than breaking into homes. I also like that he was punished for crossing a bright line. You may wonder if strange epilogues occurred. Once sued, the perpetrator may try sabotage or intimidation as a last resort. Luckily, that didn't happen. Perhaps the arrest was the final straw that made him realize he couldn't keep pushing this boundary. I occasionally see his pickup truck around town, but it stays away. He hasn't approached me or my property since. I haven't spoken to anyone who buys his spin on the story because the locals know it. Despite being vigilant, my cameras have only captured deer, raccoons, and a wandering bear, not Marlon. Still, I don't regret giving him that final lesson. Video of him trying to break in ended the game. No more politeness or ignoring red flags. We sometimes have to stand up for ourselves and push back, especially when dealing with someone who keeps pushing forward, convinced they own something they don't. The combination of his sneaky trespassing, brazen demands, bizarre justifications, and attempted break-in forced my hand. Protecting my home, safety, and holding him accountable was moral at the time. This story teaches that property boundaries and privacy aren't negotiable, no matter how harmless or manipulative someone is. Because I thought Marlon was just a lonely neighbor trying to make friends, I underestimated his potential. I learned that politeness isn't enough when someone keeps pushing and violating your space. Document everything, install security if possible, and be ready to go to court. I'm glad our legal system recognized my situation's seriousness and helped me stop it before it got worse. Another side story was my mountain self-sufficiency journey. Before, I knew only basic home security and property rights. I feel like an amateur expert now. I met many locals, from volunteer rangers to small business owners, and learned about wildlife patterns, safe trail maintenance, and how to spot trespassing signs like fresh footprints, broken branches, and out-of-place rocks. Ironically, Marlon's intrusions forced me to connect more with the community and environment, one of my original reasons for buying a cabin in the mountains. I also saw a college friend who practices law in another state. I received moral support and heard about similar cases he handled. Compared to other property disputes, my situation was typical. He said some people have bizarre obsessions with neighbors' homes or land, believing they have a right to use them. Sometimes it's mental illness, sometimes stubborn entitlement. He said I had confronted, documented, sought legal recourse, and filed charges when lines were crossed. Despite its terror and infuriation, this saga became a defining chapter in my life. I learned that having a mountain retreat is a privilege, but it requires vigilance if your neighbor thinks your property is better. I learned that kindness and generosity have limits when exploited by boundary breakers. Over time, I've found a balance between being friendly to local nice people and being wary of those with ulterior motives. Now I spend most weekends at the cabin and occasionally host guests. We hike, fish, grill dinner on the porch, and breathe Marlon's dreamy air. I can enjoy it now without looking over my shoulder. I still watch the cameras, but the dread is gone. Instead, I found the serenity I sought when I bought the cabin. Looking back, Marlon's attempt to justify his actions with respiratory issues was odd. Trying to trespass or take someone else's property is not justified by his condition. If he really needed fresh air, he should have investigated local disability programs or moved to a better place. He chose harassment and delusional self-righteousness, which got him in trouble. Whether he's learned anything or changed his behavior is unknown. But I know I woke him up by documenting his every move, standing my ground, and letting the authorities handle it when he refused to stop. In the end, the cameras, protective order, and law worked. I learned to gather evidence and follow through if you witness a blatant rights violation. Bullies take advantage of timid or lazy people who don't fight back. That's how they get away with it. I have felt unimaginable freedom in the months since this happened. My cabin is my dream retreat for soul recalibration. I almost sold it to escape Marlon's harassment, which is strange. As the autumn leaves turn golden and evening light filters through the pine trees, I am grateful I stuck with it. Adam and his fiancée will host a small holiday family gathering here. We may roast marshmallows over a fire pit, drink hot chocolate on the porch, and tell stories under the stars. My parents may stay 2 nights, something they haven't done since the engagement party crisis. If Marlon shows his face, I'll call the sheriff again. I doubt he will. His attempts to steal what was never his are likely now in their final chapter. The journey was difficult, but it ended in peace and security. I still can't believe he started the drama by saying he needed mountain air. I support health improvements, but not at the expense of my privacy and safety. He learned, perhaps the hard way, that manipulative pleas cannot deter people who stand up for their rights. That's how I persevered, protected my property, and taught him a valuable lesson. Friends, thank you. See you soon.